Hello and welcome to the Satori software webinar. How will the new Presort data update schedule impact your business? I'm Rob Perrin. I'm the Director of Technical Services here at Satori Software, and I'll be your host today. A little bit of housekeeping. This webinar is being recorded, and after the presentation it will be available via our blog on satorisoftware.com. If you have any questions during the course of this webinar, please place them into the question box on the right-hand side of your screen. I will be collating those questions and passing them along to Bob at the end of the presentation. Currently, the webinar is scheduled for 60 minutes. However, in case we happen to run over, or there's a lot of great questions coming in, we will go ahead and run over that time, so please feel free to stick around if you can. Today, we're going to be talking with Bob Schimek, and some details on Bob. He's the Senior Director of Postal Affairs for Satori Software. And as Senior Director for Postal Affairs at Satori, he applies his 24-plus years of mailing industry experience to provide product management and strategic direction for our mailing solutions. He serves as primary liaison between Satori Software and the USPS on technical matters affecting the mailing industry. Bob actively participates with postal industry associations, including MTAC, where he represents Idea Alliance. He's a board member, he's a board of directors member for Postcom and a former board member of AMSP and a current board member of NCA. Some agenda items. We will be talking about what is Presort data, the history of update schedule, important terms to understand, the new schedule, transition to the new schedule, what mailers need to know, scenarios, and updating your software. Good morning, Bob. How are you?
I am doing well, thank you.
Great. Welcome aboard. Go ahead and get started.
Okay, well, if you can pass me the control, and I will move us on to the next slide.
Okay, you should be good to go, Bob.
Doesn't appear to be allowing me to switch. All right, so let's go ahead and dive in and talk about first of all, what is Presort data? And Presort data is what is used to drive the creation of the mailings. And so what ends up happening is it's used to create sacks and trays and pallets, which you are all familiar with, but it's also being used for a number of other things in the Presort process. For example, it is also being used to determine if you're eligible to qualify for dropship discounts, and there is data that is needed for postage calculation. So if you take a closer look at all of this and look at what are the actual files, it can be broken out into 5 main file sets that are classified as Presort data. The first one is the label list data. So the labeling lists contain all the information for making those sacks, trays, pallets, and bundles as well. With the label list file, then, there's also the mail direction file. The mail direction file has a bunch of additional information in it that provides Presort the information it needs to determine, for example, where you can go to take the mail to earn a dropship discount. Next is the zone charts, also referred to as the zone matrix, and that data is used in some of the postage calculation when it comes to periodical mail and also bound printed matter. Then the last 2 files are the delivery statistics file and the city-state file. So when we look at the last 2 files, those 2 files are technically considered AIS products. AIS essentially means that they're more address-based files and used also in the CAS process, as opposed to ones like label list, mail direction file, and zone charts, which are really used purely by Presort. It's important to understand that the last 2 are AIS products, because when we get a little bit further in the presentation, we're going to be talking about the update cycle and how the 3 files don't necessarily sync exactly with the two AIS files, but we'll get into that detail later. All right, what we're going to do now is just take a look at where did we come from and where are we going, and make sure everyone's on the same page. And so if we go back to prior to 2013, what was happening with label lists was that they were updated every other month. So there were 6 updates a year. With those label list updates, as soon as the Postal Service published the data, which would usually show up in a postal bulletin notice, it would be effective immediately, which means you could, as soon as they published it, you could start using it for live mailings immediately. And then there was also a 75-day transition window, and at the end of the window, you new updated label list information for all your mailings that you were submitting to the Postal Service. Also going on at that same time, if we looked at the mail direction file, that file was actually being updated on a daily basis. So there was a lot of churn going on, and that was generating a lot of questions in the industry of, well, which one's the right one? And you would essentially have, your mail direction file of the day. And so there was a lot of churn going on with that. So what ended up happening was there was an MTAC work group that was created to kind of get our arms around all of this and say, hey, we need to have a more unified approach to how this data is organized and distributed. Along with that, the Postal Service, as a part of their network rationalization, was saying that that 75-day transition window was just way too long, and that changes needed to occur there. So as a result of that MTAC work group, we moved into, at the beginning of 2013, a brand new schedule for updating all of the Presort data. And what ended up happening was we ended up transitioning from 6 updates per year of the label list to just 4. And those 4 occur on the first month of every quarter. Also, what was done was the mail direction file, everyone agreed that having daily releases of that was not a good way to work. And so there was agreement to align the mail direction file where there would be 6 updates. 4 would align with the label list updates at the beginning of every quarter. And then there was also 2 additional updates that occurred through the year that were kind of off cycle. That gave the Postal Service additional opportunity to update it. The other thing that was new that was introduced in 2013 was the concept of a 15-day notification period. And so what happened is the Postal Service would publish the data. There would be this 15-day period where you really couldn't use it yet. Generally, what was happening is the software providers were using that 15-day period to build the data and then make it available to you, the customers. And then once that data became available, there was a new 30-day transition window. So essentially what happened in 2013 was that 75-day transition window shrunk down to a 30-day window. So mailers had to be much more aggressive about making sure they were transitioning to the new data. All right, I already started using some of these terms, and so I think it was important to, when we start looking at the new schedule, make sure we all have a common understanding of some of these terms, because I'm going to be using them through the rest of the presentation. So the first one is the publication date. So the publication date is the day that the Postal Service actually publishes the data and makes it available for the industry. And with the new schedule that we're moving to, the publication date is always going to be the first business day of the month. Next is a notification period. I already referenced that notification period with the 2013 schedule, where there is that 15-day notification period. The notification period is the time between the publication date and the effective date. And it's a window. That window is the data is out and available. Industry has access to it, but you can't use that data to pre-sort a mailing and submit it to the Postal Service. So it's not, the data is not yet in effect. So the next item is the effective date. The effective date is essentially the very first day that you can use that data and create a mailing and submit that mailing to the Postal Service and then enter it and give it and turn it over to the Postal Service. Transition window. The transition window starts with the effective date, and then it's a 30-day window where you have the previous month's data is the active list, and this one is now transitioning in as the new list that needs to be used, or the new data set that needs to be used. So the transition window in the new schedule is it continues to be a 30-day transition window. So it's a time period where you have an opportunity to migrate from an older data set to the new data set that just came out. Expiration date is the very last day that it's valid to use that data set for mailings that are being entered. And then the last one is induction date. And so for those of you that are not drop shipping, essentially your mail verification date and your induction date are the same day. You know, if you're just taking your mail into your local post office, you know, they verify the mail and they accept it, and it's inducted that same day. For those that are drop shipping, the induction day could be several days after the mail verification date. So for example, they end up, you know, getting the mail verified, they load it on a truck, it gets hauled across the country, and then gets entered at its entry destination. At the point that let's say, pallet of mail is offloaded off the truck and scanned by the Postal Service, that is the induction date. I just wanted to point out at the bottom of the screen, you'll see what I've done is in this presentation at the very end of the slide deck is a set of definitions for all these. So for those of you that may have been taking notes about making sure you understand what all these are, they are defined at the end of the presentation, and so this presentation will be made available after we are done, and so you'll have that available for your reference. All right, so let's take a look at the new schedule. The new schedule is going to start in September. We'll get into a little bit more detail, but previously the Postal Service had planned to move to monthly updates in July, but the Postal One release has been pushed from July to what they're referring to as August, September, because it deploys at the end of August and it goes into effect at the beginning of September. Specifically September 7th is when the new version of Postal One takes over. And so with that slide, then the move to monthly updates also needs to slide to September as well. So once we get to September, the new schedule is going to be that Presort data will begin to be published by the Postal Service on a monthly basis. As I noted, it'll be the first business day of the month. One of the things that the software providers have committed to doing in working with the Postal Service and the industry on this is they will use the first 5 business days to essentially take the Postal Service data, crunch it down, and then make it available for customers to be able to download and have it available for them electronically. So from a customer's point of view, roughly the beginning of the second week of the month, then that data should be available to you to be downloaded, and you could start potentially working with it. As I talked a little bit earlier about the AIS products are on a slightly different schedule. The AIS products always get published on the 15th of the month. And so what will happen is the Postal Service will publish the label list, the mail direction file, and the zone matrix on the first business day of the month. So we will take all that data and compress it into the Presort data files. And then at that point in time, the only data that we have available for the AIS products, which are the delivery statistics and the city-state file, is the data from that was published the 15th of the month prior. So we'll take that data, and that's the data that we'll be using for city-state and the delivery stats. And then that will all get bundled into a single data package. There will be a 30-day notification period, so the Postal Service is expanding what was previously the 15-day notification period, which is what we're what we have been doing since the beginning of 2013 will get expanded to 30 days. And then after the 30-day notification period will be a 30-day transition window. And then that, again, that transition window is where you can either be using, you can start using the new data, but also the previous month's data is still valid until that end of that month. Mailers, so with this new schedule, mailers, as I noted, will have about 3 weeks of that notification period where they can start working with and using that new data. So if you go out to the Postal Service's website out on RIBS and look for this, you can find this is the schedule for 2014. And so the change to the monthly updates is really going to start with row number 5. So if you look at row number 5, we'll kind of walk across there. As I noted, if we talk about September data, it actually gets published by the Postal Service the month prior because of the 30-day notification period. So when I refer to September data, it actually gets published on August 1st. And so if we walk through the schedule, we see on the second column, 8/1, there's your August 1st date where the Postal Service publishes the new September data that will go into effect on September 1st, which is column, the third date column. You'll see the 9/1/2014. As I was talking about earlier, the AIS products are on a slightly different schedule. So when the Postal Service publishes the September data on August 1st, we will grab the July 14th AIS products, city, state, and delivery stats file to make as a part of this build process. So 9/1 is essentially the effective date for the September data. Another term, as you'll see at the top of that column, is the Postal Service also refers to it as the begin usage date. And then the next column over, 10/1/2014, the Postal Service has listed this as the mandatory usage date. And the reason it's a mandatory usage date is because the data of the previous month officially expires, so then at that point in time, you have to be using the new data. And then you'll see on the far right column, the Postal Service also defines the difference between a major and a minor release. And essentially, a major release are always going to be the first month of a quarter. And in a major release, the Postal Service is saying essentially all the data files can potentially change and have updated and new information. You'll see that the second and third months of every quarter are referred to as a minor release. And a minor is what the Postal Service is saying is that the only thing that will change in a minor release is if you look at the label list data, any of the label lists that are five-digit scheme-based label lists, those are the ones that could potentially change. And there's 4 of them, and only those 4 will change. The other thing to point out on this schedule is the very last footnote at the bottom. You'll see the arrow on the right-hand side. I already kind of touched on this, but I want to point it out. Today, if you're trying to determine is a label list current or is it expired, it is based on the date that the mailing is verified. So if you're doing full service and you're doing electronic documentation, it is your mailing date that the Postal Service is looking at to determine whether or not on the mailing date is that label list an active and valid label list. When we get to October, there's going to be a new release of Postal One that's going to go out in October. And at that point in time, the definition of a valid label list is going to be changing to the date that the mail is inducted. So again, if you're not drop shipping, this has very little impact on you, because if you're not drop shipping, mail induction date is the same day as your mail verification day. However, if you're drop shipping, and from what I've talking with customers, when you are drop shipping, it could be, up to 8 days later after mail verification before the mail is actually inducted into the Postal Service. So when you're trying to figure out what is the right label list to be using, you're going to have to, as we move forward, look at making sure you understand what is the mail induction date and using that to determine which label list you need to use. So here are some side effects of this new schedule that we need to keep in mind. Each monthly update is going to have a lifespan of 3 months. The first month is the notification period where the Postal Service has published it, but you cannot use it on a live mailing that you're going to submit that month. Then once you hit the effective date, that label list is valid to be used for a 2-month period of time. So September, for example, if we look at September data gets published in the month of August. You can't use it in the month of August. It becomes valid to use September 1st, and it is good for the months of September and October. When you get to October 31st, the September data set will officially expire, and you'll have to be using a new one. This will mean that once we get into this new cycle, on any given month, you're going to have 3 different label lists that are in play on any given month. You have one data set that's in its notification period. You'll have one data set that is currently transitioned in as the new active label list that you can use for mailing. And then you'll have a third data set, which is the previous month's data, which is going to be expiring at the end of the month and will no longer be valid at the end of the month that we're currently in. This is going to mean for some of you that may be doing pre-sorts, 90 days or more in advance of when the mail is inducted, this is going to mean that you are no longer going to be able to do this. I know one of the mailer practices that has happened is that a customer may do a single pre-sort, and then a third of it drops maybe on month 1, a third drops on month 2, and a third drops on month 3, all done from the same pre-sort. If you look at this new schedule, that's not going to be possible anymore, and what you're going to have to do is, in those scenarios, you are going to have to break those up into doing more pre-sorts at different points in time to be able to get that mailing out. Some of this might be hard to get your head wrapped around, so I believe this is a very good way of showing it in a little bit more visual way of what's going to be going on. And what I would like to do is say, let's take a look at what happens when we get to the month of October, because now in the month of October, we're going to have 3 different data sets in play. So the first data set in the top row is going to be the September data. Well, the September data, you could start using September 1st, but then it officially expires on October 31st. So in the month of October, it's still valid to be using, but if you know your mail is going to be inducted after October 31st, you're not going to be able to use that label list anymore. But for the month of October, it's valid for any mailing. All right. Also, in the month of October, we will have the October data, which actually was published by the Postal Service on September 1st. You can start using it on October 1st, and it is good for any mailings that are going to be submitted in the months of October and November. So again, if we're sitting in the month of October, you have the mailing that's going to be inducted in November, you're going to have to use the November, one of the options would be to use the October data, because it's valid for the months of October and November. Also, if we look at October now, the last row, we also will have the November data that will be in its notification period. So the November data gets published on October 1st. You can't use it for any mailings before November 1st, but then the November data is good for the months of November and December. So if we look at the month of October, you were doing a pre-sort and you knew it wasn't going to get dropped until November, your options could be you could use October data to do the pre-sort, or you could use November data to do the pre-sort, and both would be valid. What we want to do now is cover, okay, we just kind of walk through what happens once we get into the monthly cycle. We're not quite there yet, so we want to spend a little bit of time talking about, well, what's going to happen from now until September, and what do I need, what should I expect to see, and what's going to be happening. So let's look at the month of July. July was going to be when the Postal Service was going to transition to monthly updates. That's not going to happen. July is also the first month of the quarter, and so what the decision has been is the Postal Service is treating the July update almost like, and I say almost like a regular quarterly update. There was a couple of differences, though. If it was a typical quarterly update, like we have been doing on the existing schedule, the Postal Service would have published the data on June 15th. There would have been a 15-day notification period, and then the 30-day transition window. That's what we've been doing for the last year as far as quarterly updates. The slight difference was the Postal Service actually published the July data on June 1st. So software providers have this new July data. However, just so all of you on this know, we have found problems with the June data. They have been reported to the Postal Service. They are working on getting the data fixed, and the commitment that we have from the Postal Service is that they will have new data. They're going to be republishing July data, and they'll have it republished by the end of this week. So by June 20th, the Postal Service is going to publish corrected data, and then that's what we will be using to build our July data. So then you can expect, early next week, we will be able to start building that data, and then shortly thereafter we'll be looking at getting it distributed to you. The expectation is by the end of June we will be publishing July data, and then you will have your typical quarterly 30-day transition window. Typically with a quarterly update, so one of the other changes, typically with a quarterly update, July data would not expire until October 31st. Well, with the transition to monthly updates starting in September, the July data is actually going to expire September 30th instead of October 31st. So that's one thing that you're going to need to be aware of, is really this July update is, instead of being good for a full quarter, is going to be just one month shorter, that its lifespan is going to be slightly shorter. So for July, at the end of June, you will be getting a new data update. In August, the Postal Service will not publish a new mail direction file, a new label list file, or a zone matrix. With that said, you still may receive an August update of Presort data from us, because also part of that data set is the city-state file and the delivery stats file, and the AIS products are updated every single month, and so we will have August AIS data to distribute. So what we'll be doing is there will be an August update of Presort data that will have a new city-state file, a new delivery statistics file, but it'll be reusing the same July data for the mail direction file, the label list, and the zone matrix. So that's the month of August, and then in September, that is when we begin the transition to monthly updates. Now, the thing to keep in mind, though, is, as I've been stating, September data will get published by the Postal Service on August 1st. The software providers, software vendors, will have 5 business days to turn that data around and have it available for you, the mailers, to be download. So by August 8th, you will have your first monthly update, which is September data. again, some important points that we just want to make sure everyone is very aware of, and that is, the first thing is defining what is a valid data set. And as I've talked, currently it's based off of the mailing date, the mail verification date. But again, please be aware in October that the postal definition changes, and it's going to be based off of your induction date. So the next item is, questions have come up. What happens if I use an expired Presort data set? Is the Postal Service just going to flat out refuse my mailing? And the answer is no. What the Postal Service is going to be doing is that they're going to be looking at electronic data, and they'll be comparing that electronic data and all the information that has been provided about the makeup of the mailing, which has, it has all the information about all the containers and bundles and everything that were built. It's going to be comparing that data against the two valid label lists that are available, and as long as the data aligns with those two valid label lists, no errors will be flagged. So an example that I have asked the Postal Service, and they have confirmed this, is, so let's say I use an expired label list, but the only changes with the new updated label list was, let's say, a bunch of zip codes and stuff changed out on the West Coast. I'm doing a mailing that was only on the East Coast, so I wasn't affected by any of the facility changes. If I do that mailing with an expired label list, will the Postal Service error it out? And the answer is no, because if all the containers were built and were based for the East Coast and no changes occurred to that part of the label list in the mail direction file, then when the Postal Service analyzes the data and the electronic documentation, it's going to see that all the containers were built according to the current zip codes and the current data, because nothing changed there. So technically, it's still a valid mailing with no problems. The last item to point out is that with the minor updates, again, the only thing changing is 5-digit scheme data. And so here's where we've listed out specifically which of the label list tables are potentially going to get updated with a minor update, and that's L006, L007, L012, and L606. Part of the reason for the Postal Service moving to monthly updates is they have, for those of you that may have noticed, when we got to this past January, the Postal Service has gotten much more aggressive about putting more zip codes together in schemes, in 5-digit schemes. In the letter world, they got much more aggressive about expanding how many zip codes are schemed together. They're also in the process of doing the same thing for flats, which is L006 and L007. So with the July update, you're going to see much more aggressive in those tables as well. That's a benefit to mailers because it's going to help more mail qualify at 5-digit prices. So it should have a postage impact, in a favorable way, ideally. So that's a positive. But one of the things with the Postal Service being more aggressive about these updates is they also said that they need more control to ebb and flow what zip codes get schemed together as mail volume fluctuates. So, for example, now as we go into the fall mailing season, that's the heavy season for the Postal Service, what they need to be able to do is unscheme some of the 5-digit zips during the heavy mailing season, because there'd be too much volume to keep them all together and run them on a single sort scheme. So what you're going to see is the scheme tables change slightly over each month. In the fall mailing season, you have less zip codes schemed together, but then when you get to a quieter time of the year, for example, like now, the Postal Service will be more aggressively putting more 5 digits together. And then one thing to point out here is that, since September is not the first month of a quarter, it will be a minor update. All right. been talking through a lot of stuff. One of the things that we want to do now is just kind of walk through a couple of scenarios and see if we can give you a couple of tangible examples of the types of things that you're going to have to be watching and monitoring to figure out what is the right label list to be using for a given pre-sort. So first scenario is, let's say we're sitting here on August 1st and a pre-sort job comes in that is scheduled to be inducted on October 31st. And the question is can I do that pre-sort? Can I run that pre-sort on August 1st? So if we look at the date August 1st, the Postal Service will just have published the September data, but that September data is going to be in the notification period. So you can't use it for mailings in the month of August. But like as we said, the induction date is on October 31st, and September data is good for September and October. So in theory, it's good for October. You can use on August 1st. You could do that. Use September data for a mailing that you're going to submit on October 31st. The catch here is that September data won't be available from your vendor until approximately August 8th. So even though the Postal Service published the data on August 1st, the vendors still have to compress it, test it, make sure there isn't any issues with it, and then publish it and make it available to you. So in this scenario, the answer would be you couldn't run that job on August 1st. You would have to wait a week for the software providers like Satori to make that data available to you, and so most likely a week later you would be able to run that job that would be inducted on October 31st. Now the other thing to keep in mind is if you know that mailing is going to be inducted on October 31st, and if you think there's any possibility that that induction date could slip a couple of days, then this answer completely changes, because as soon as you get into November, September data is no longer valid. So what you would have to do is, if you think there's a possibility that this job might slide into the beginning of November, you would actually have to wait until September. October data is published, and October data would be published on September 1st. And so around the second week of September, you would have access to October data, which would be good for October and November. And at that point in time, then you would be able to do the pre-sort. So again, if that date slid to November and that job came in on August 1st, you would not really be able to pre-sort it until the second week of September. All right, another scenario, and it's really just kind of looking at similar scenario and from a little different perspective. So if let's say it's currently September 10th, and a pre-sort job comes in, and the job is scheduled to be inducted in the middle of October, October 17th, then the question is, what are the valid data sets that can be used to do that pre-sort? So the first one is, job comes in September 10th. I could use September data, because September data is good for September and October, and October 7th is, it falls in that window. The other thing that I could do is by September 10th, I should have the new October data, and the October data is in, because it'll get published on September 1st, it'll be in the notification period, but since the job is not going to be inducted until October 7th, the October data would also be a valid label, a valid data set to use. So in this scenario, if you're mailing in October, your valid data sets could be either September data or October data. Now, depending on which product you're using, we want to just walk through and help you understand a little bit better what's going to be happening. So for those of you that are bulk mailer customers, the files get distributed to you, as a part of the pre-sort data will be distributed as part of the product updates, and you can also download them through the live update capability built into the product. If you try and do a mailing that is, let's say, sufficiently far out that there isn't a valid data set to use, pre-sort data set to use for that mailing, the product will notify you that, based on your your mailing date or your induction day, that is not, there isn't a valid data set to use. And next, it just shows where you can go and find in the live updates. If you're not familiar with that capability, it's something that you can look into. It's there and it's available. Another thing that we also recommend is that you sign up for product notifications. So if you sign up for this, as soon as the data is released and available for electronic download, you will receive an email notification of that fact. If you are using Satori Architect or Satori Office, again, the Presort data will be distributed to you with monthly updates and be provided as a product update or with service packs. Again, if you're using either one of these products, if you try and do a Presort that is sufficiently out in the future and there's no data set available to run, you will be notified of that. And then obviously, with just a recommendation that, especially with these monthly updates now, when you do receive them, please install them as quickly as you can, because that's going to be what's going to allow you to do those pre-sorts that are a little bit further out, is by getting that newest updated information. Again, we recommend you sign up for product notifications and receive email updates of when the new data is being published. For those of you that are using Satori Presort, there's going to be a new release of that product that is going to have some changes that is going to allow you to specify just the folder where the Presort data files are located, and there will be an option available to you where you can let Presort automatically pick what the right directory is for you. But part of that is, in the job setup, you do need to specify what your expected mail induction date is, and then based off of that, it will go out and look for the correct data set to use for that. And then if no data set is available based on that date, you will be notified as well. And finally, for those of you that are using our Monticello solution, again, data will be downloaded. You can download the data from the Postal Service, or you will receive the updates from Satori. One of the things that we want to cover here is, since Monticello is a post-Presort solution, there's some additional scenarios that it has to account for that you don't have to worry about when you're looking at just a Presort solution. And that is, if you bring in a mail.dat that is just a single mail.dat for a single job, Monticello will use the same month data as what was used for the Presort. Monticello also has the capability of taking multiple mail.dats, bringing them together, and then creating a single mailing out of those. In that case, for combined jobs, Monticello will be using, let's say one job was used with, let's say September data, and one was used October data, but both September and October are current and valid for this job. In that scenario, Monticello will use the newer one for the work that it does. So if a job had September data and October data, Monticello would be working with the October data. And again, just a reminder to make sure that you're loading the files as soon as possible, because that's going to give you the most flexibility for doing a wide range of pre-sorts across a bigger window of time. All right, with that, we are coming up now on any questions that you have. I've kind of thrown a lot at you, so if you have questions, we can go into those now.
Thanks, Bob. That was a lot of information to digest in one place, so we're going to give everybody an opportunity to send any questions they've got in via the box on the right-hand side of their screen now. We'll go ahead and talk about the upcoming webinar for a moment. If you could stay on the line with us in case we get something in, that would be fantastic. If not, we will be accepting questions, and we'll continue to accept questions, and we can potentially answer those via the website after this webinar is over. So as Bob mentioned, we've got an upcoming webinar coming up shortly here. We've got World Marketing Cuts Postage Costs and Improves Mailing Efficiency. It's going to be June 24th, 2014 at 11 a.m. Pacific Time. Once again, if you've got questions, I see that we've got a few coming in at this point, so we'd be happy to take those while we've got Bob Schimek on the line. So, Bob, can you see the questions there popping up on your screen?
I do.
Perfect. We'll go ahead and let you answer that first one that's come in.
Okay. So the question is on the USPS release schedule chart on line 6, should expiration be 11:30 and not 10:30? So sorry if I flip through the deck real quick to go back to that screenshot.
Absolutely, Bob.
Or if you want to go back to, let's pop back to that one and take a look at it and find it.
We're going to go ahead and give you control on the deck back and
Okay.
let you find the slides you need as these questions are coming in.
All right. I thought I had it. Come on.
Okay, you should have control now, Bob.
There it is. All right.
Perfect.
Just a little slow in responding. All right. All right. Let's go back here. Find it. All right. So row number 6. So we have, if we look at it, we are talking about October data. So October data is going to get published on the 1st of September. You can begin using it in October, and it's good for the months of October and November. And you are absolutely correct that 10/30/2014 should be 11/30 because, yeah, the mandatory use date, because the previous month's data expires on November 1st. So, yes, good catch. That is an error in the Postal Service calendar. So I will report that back to the Postal Service and make sure they get that updated. So looking at row 7, let's make sure that one is correct. Yep, okay. So row 7 is correct. So like if we look at row 7, we're talking about November data. November data gets published at the 1st of October, and November data is good for November and December and expires on December 31st. So yeah, that is a typo. Good catch. So I'll give credit there to Bill Walters. Good catch. All right, next question. For the October switch to induction date as expiring, is that taking place as of October 1? Good question. It's actually going to go into effect with the October Postal One release. And so, you know, there's actually 2 releases of Postal One that are happening very closely together. So there was the original July release of Postal One, which has now slid from July to August/September. And so the exact dates for that are they deployed the new Postal One release on August 24th, and it goes into effect on September 7th. And then in October, they're going to be doing what they refer to as a minor update, where there isn't going to be, like with this September-August one, there's like a new version of mail.dat that's going to become available. So that mail.dat 14-2 will be a new version that the Postal Service supports. Well, in October, it's just going to be a minor one with some fixes in it. Off the top of my head, I'm not sure what the exact deployment date of that October release is, but the answer is going to be when they deploy that new release of Postal One in October. That's when that's going to go into effect. And so I want to say it's either the 2nd or 3rd week of October that change takes place. All right, the next question is, how can we get a copy of the presentation? And I believe what we do is within a couple of days, we make this presentation available on the Satori site. So you should be able to just go out to the Satori website and be able to download it.
So Bob, The presentation as well as the slide deck will be available via the Satori software blog, and Jerisa is telling me that that will happen very shortly after we close this presentation out.
Oh, awesome.
Perfect. Well, Bob, I appreciate you being with us today. As I had mentioned, we do have another upcoming webinar, World Marketing Cuts Postage Costs and Improves Mailing Efficiency. That's going to be June 24th at 11 a.m. After this webinar, if you need additional support, you can contact Satori Support at support@satorisoftware.com or call 800-357-3020. We do want to thank you for attending. We appreciate your time today. You will be given the opportunity to complete a short survey about this webinar after you log out, after we end the webinar. So we'd love to get your feedback on what you enjoyed or didn't enjoy. Once again, the recorded session and presentation will be available very shortly in the next couple of days at the absolute outside on the satorisoftware.blog. satorisoftware.com blog. We would, as I said, like to thank you for attending this webinar. How will the new Presort data update schedule impact your business? Today we've been talking with Bob Schimek. He's the Senior Director of Postal Affairs for Satori Software. Thank you for attending, Bob. This webinar has been produced by Jerisa Chang. For Satori Software, I'm Rob Perrin, the Director of Technical Services. And finally, once again, thank you for attending our webinar.